Hi everyone, it's Jeremy here from the McLean Real Estate Group and Remax Camosun in Victoria, BC. A couple times a year we always like to run informational sessions for the general public and help them within their journey of buying real estate. And last week we had Russell Cass from Home Check come in and talk about depreciation reports and budgets within stratas, and really does an amazing job at deciphering what these confusing reports mean. Presentation is a little bit lengthy, but contains a lot of valuable information for anybody looking to get into a strata complex, which is any condo, townhome, duplex, or bareland strata. So I hope you enjoy all the content and feel free to add any questions that you have into the comments below.
I'm also what's called a CPI, so I'm a commercial property inspector, and I'm an RRFA, which is a registered reserve fund analyst. So I do all that sort of stuff. My background is in construction, appraisal. I've been a property developer. I've been a carpenter, and I was a soldier for a few years in a war that nobody knows about. But I'm still here and I'm alive, and I'm going to give you a little presentation about these things. Everybody recognize what this is? Yeah. I don't know if this is anybody's in the room, but the interesting thing with this is not unlike a depreciation report. It's simply on an individual, whereas a depreciation report is on the building and it's going to do a whole bunch of ratings. And like most depreciation report, this one has an error. I don't know if you spotted it, but none of them are exact sciences. So what is a depreciation report? We heard Ryan talk a little bit about regulations, and the regulations define what it is. It tells you about projecting for 30 years. It tells you about the stuff that needs to go in. It talks about qualified person, and it actually defines a qualified person as being somebody who has experience in the buildings and their systems and financial understanding, which, if you really break it down, is just about everybody in here, because you all live in a building, you kind of understand how the elevator works, and you walk through the corridors, and unless you're deeply in overdraft, you understand how finances work. And actually, even if you are, you still understand how finances work. So everybody here is a qualified person. Should you be doing depreciation reports? I wouldn't. There's a certain amount of liability that goes with it, and the regulations lay out what a depreciation report is and how to do it, but they don't tell you how to do it properly. So major corporations, what do they have to do with depreciation reports? 30 years ago, I was doing depreciation reports for coal mines and gold mines and sugar mills and pulp and paper mills, because they understood that if they were turning over $100 million a year and making $40 million in profit, they wanted to know how much to put back in to look after that machinery, the equipment, the vehicles, the buildings, to continue making a profit. So they were very conscientious about making sure that the golden egg was never eaten, that they could continue going. And that really is the idea about a depreciation report in a building. Anxiety and stress, that's also what a depreciation report is, because if it's not done right, and I'm going to explain what right is in my mind, then you're going to get stress. Because you get this report suddenly that says that you're going to need to do some testing, and when you do the testing, you're going to need to spend 50 grand, and you didn't budget for it, because it's kind of coming as a little bit of surprise. I just laid this little thing out. The report really, just basics. The report requires a site visual inspection. So by putting that in there, like Alberta, for example, they require a visual inspection, and then you don't have to do it on what they call the update. It can be a desktop update. The reason it's written in the legislation here, I think, and it's pretty descriptive, it's got to be the physical buildings and its inventory, and the inventory is actually described in the regulations, is so that the person looking at those assets can determine their condition, their expected remaining life. If you have a depreciation report written by somebody who right in the front has a disclaimer that says, I have no technical knowledge and ability, and I am using a program to do this, they actually just disqualified themselves from being a qualified person by the first two parts of that. So if you've got one of those, go back and read it carefully. What is required in the report is a summary of repairs and maintenance. And I'm putting this up because I see an awful lot of these. I've looked at over 2,000 in the Victoria area. And from what I'm seeing, 80% of them do not contain repairs and maintenance sufficiently. If you do not put in the maintenance or the repairs that are required, you need to qualify why you don't. You cannot just ignore it. The Act tells you to do these things. If you're not going to do them, you need to tell people why not. When we get to the financial part, because the depreciation report is divided into two parts. One is collect all the data, describe what repairs, what maintenance, when it's going to occur, how much it's going to cost. Take all of that data and put it into the financial forecasting sections, which require a minimum of 3 financial plans. As Ryan pointed out earlier, there's that minimum, partly funded, fully funded. In the 2,000 I've looked at, I found all kinds. I found some that are recommended, and when I analyze them and break them down, they're the worst one of the 3. So I'm beginning to question the quality and the qualification of the people doing some of these things. In the financial forecasting, for the first time, it talks about replacement. There's an emphasis here in the regulations to take account of repairs and maintenance before you get to replacement. Now, anybody here ever bought a new car? Perfect. You buy a new car, you drive it off the lot, you never maintain it and repair it. What's going to happen to your replacement expected life? You think you're going to get the life that it's intended to get? No. So repairs and maintenance are extremely important. The depreciation report, and I've put in red there, inclusive, because to have a depreciation report done right, financial plans are going to be attached. Has anybody ever had a financial plan done for them where they were not consulted? No. When you go to an investment guy and you say, I need a plan so that I can retire, he doesn't say to you, well, great, go away and I'll do this and you come back and I'll give it to you. A financial plan, if you came to me and said, Russell, I am deeply in debt. I owe $100,000. Help me. And I'm in that business. And I say, sure, I'll charge you a little fee and I will make 3 plans for you. And plan 1 is, it's quite simple. Write a check for $100,000. Well, that's not going to work because you came looking for help. Plan 2 and plan 3 is write 1 for 50 and then, or 2 for 50 and then write 4 checks for 25. It's got to be inclusive. You need to have input initially as a strata council, and then at your AGM, owners need to know what's going on, and a plan should be workable. There are times when it cannot be, when the strata is so run down and so badly maintained that there is going to be some pain and suffering financially for the people living there. That's just a reality. So the little thing in the middle, I took a long time to put that all together, cut and paste and everything. And you'll see there's finances and money and stress and all of that stuff all listed in there. The reason you want this all to work and be projecting correctly, your report card needs to take you from a place you are, maybe at a C, to an A. That will keep your value maintained or increase it. And as Ryan said earlier, and I think the question was directed to insurance, are you able to get insurance if you don't have a depreciation report? And I've never heard of anybody not getting it. But what's happening in the market is people are getting savvy about these things. They want to buy in, they want to read it, they want to see it, they want it analyzed. You don't have one? Uh-oh. There's definitely a caution. I know banks are looking at it. If there isn't a depreciation report, they want to see X thousands of dollars in the fund based on the number of owners. So there's definitely now a microscope coming onto these things. So the value of your asset and maintaining it is the primary reason. So what do you look for? So you're going to buy a place, or you're living in a strata and you've been given a depreciation report presented at the AGM. And at the AGM, when this thing comes up and you're voting on it, you are voting to accept this as a true and accurate reflection of your strata. Because other people are going to read it and go, oh my goodness, look what this thing says. And when they come back and say, you're selling your unit, but there's this $80,000 special assessment next year, and we want to get money off. Well, this market, nobody negotiates, but In a balanced market, they do. And you're shocked. You had the first idea, you had no idea. This is the first time you've ever heard this. It's there in the document. When you're voting to accept these things, look at them. This fellow that you see here, he's a qualified person. Look at him. He's working on a building. And if he's the guy that wrote your report, well, then there's a conflict of interest. All right. So the things you want to look for in a depreciation report is, does it have the repairs, the maintenance, and the replacement? Is it all there? Or is yours just focusing on replacement? Replacement's the easiest to do. And how you know that is if you had a car and you drive onto a car lot and ask a dealer if it's time for a new car, he'll tell you. Absolutely, of course it is. So replacement's easy to work out. Repairs and maintenance, not quite so easy. That takes actually analyzing the asset, looking at its maintenance history, if it exists, trying to work out how much longer will this thing go. And in my mind, the best time to replace an asset is 5 minutes before it fails. That way you got all your money out of it. The hard part is working out that 5 minutes. So then look at the financial plans and ask yourself the question, do these plans actually physically work for me? Am I going to be pressed into hardship with this? Or am I able to deal with this? If they're not working, you got questions to ask. And serious questions, because this is a serious document. Other people are going to look at it, and they're going to hold you to it if you agree to it. Conflict of interest. So here's the fellow working on the roof, and he happens to be the guy who did your depreciation report, who told you need some roof work and metal work done. And he then did a whole bunch of tests, and 2 months later he's actually working on your building, and you're going to pay a lot of money. I'm using the roofer here, and please forgive me, I don't want to say who this really is. So conflict of interest, in my mind, is a huge issue. If somebody's working on your depreciation report and tells you need to do something, that may be very, very true. But you want to get other people to do it, not necessarily the guy, unless he's absolutely fantastic at what he does. You want to make sure you know a spread of what will that cost, who will do it, everything that's involved. This all makes sense because when you get a plumber, okay, well that's not true, because to get a plumber you got to take whatever you get. But let's say, well, they're all the trades are that way now, I guess. Compliance. You've got your depreciation report, the plans work for you, you're really excited about it, but is it compliant? Has it met all the yardsticks that are required in the regulation? Because if it doesn't, it's really not worth anything. The reality is right now, there are no strata police. So nobody's coming to arrest anybody if it's not compliant. And the majority of people reading these things don't know what they mean anyway, so not really a big effect yet. But we look to the East Coast, where Ontario has had this for coming up 30 years. Mm-hmm. Their legislation, unlike ours, which is very loosey-goosey, and I heard kind of a question about that earlier, in my opinion is it's loosey-goosey because the government wanted everybody to come on board and they wanted to make it as easy as possible. Legislation in time will tighten up. Ontario, no special levies allowed. You've got to have it in your contributions. So they have stratas there with lots and lots of money in their funds to deal with it. Qualified person there is only an engineer, technologist, and appraiser, and accountant. That's it. They're defined exactly who it is. The eye test I'm putting up here, because regulations generally put people to sleep, so I'm trying to fool you that this is actually an eye test to get you to have a look. You'll see the report. This is the section that says in item 2, first the physical component, I've kind of highlighted that, but B, summary of repairs and maintenance. And then every time I write this, spell check comes up and tells me that this is terrible grammar, but the government wrote it, so it cannot be wrong. That usually occurs less often than once a year, or that does not usually occur. Everybody understand what that means? It's confusing. Your building has 2 repair and maintenance areas. One is in the operating fund. That's the stuff that may happen on a month-to-month basis, or happens in 6 months. The stuff that is outside of annual. is what we're talking about, or that doesn't normally happen. You'll see the financial forecast and then the financial, and we go in there and we look at item A, the anticipated maintenance, repair, and replacement. So now we're seeing replacement. But repairs and maintenance is really very, very important in this whole thing. And I find as I look over those 2,000 depreciation reports, as I said, very few of them go into repairs and maintenance because replacement's actually a hell of a lot easier to write. You're going to look at buying a condo unit, and your realtor's provided you with some documents. And I just illustrated the half of them. I didn't want to put them all in there. And amongst that is the depreciation report and everything else. It's pretty confusing. You're going to have Ryan on speed dial. So amongst them will be the depreciation report document, providing it's compliant, it's got a workable plan, it doesn't scare the hell out of everybody. You move on and you start looking at, there's the financial plans. Now let's have a look at the actual financials of this corporation. These plans are indicating they need to put away $45,000 a year, and we look at the financials and find they're putting away $6,000 a year. Because like we said earlier, you don't have to do what it's telling you. But remember, the buyer is looking at it and going, well, unless you're doing that, there's going to be huge special levies. What does this all mean that you're only putting away $6,000? I'm very nervous now. All right, it's like when my wife tells me to save for a holiday, and I put away a lot of money. And then she says she's saving for a pair of shoes, and she puts away more money, I get really nervous. You also want to have a look at AGM and SGM minutes. I'm only hitting the highlights here. Like Ryan said, he's going to look at all the minutes. I hate looking at the minutes. I don't want to know Mrs. Brown's cats peed on the carpet again on the second floor. But AGM and SGM, that's where people are voting. That's where they're talking about the money. So between the financials and the AGM, I can see, and I do that comparison. I go from what you're voting on into the actual report to see what it says you should be doing. And if I see that you should be replacing the roof, and in that year, you're not even talking about it, I take real careful notice now. So if it says replace the roof, and you know it doesn't need to be done because you had 3 roofers come out and look at it, and they said, you got 5 more years. Record it in your minutes. Just make a note and say it so that a buyer who knows nothing about your building can start getting informed about it. There's a building in town here that has had 2 engineering reports, one done by one firm of engineers, the next one done by another firm of engineers. And we go out to look at it, and we look at the roof, and we realize it's going to fail 5 or 6 years before it's projected to be replaced. So everybody that's buying into that building, who we're actually looking and analyzing this for them, they know that. They also know that the projected $5,000 special levy when this happens will not be $5,000. We've worked it out. We know it's going to be about $7,500. And so when this hit, none of our clients were scared. They all knew. If you are prepared for something, even if it's scary, you can deal with it. It's when you're not prepared. That's when it's terrifying. So who are we? All of us are applied science technologists. There's 4 of us here tonight. Ryan's actually hiding at the back there amongst you because he's younger and he wants to blend in.
I don't get to stand the other guys yet.
All of us are applied science technologists. We happen to do home inspections because it's just part of the industry. We also do commercial stuff. We do depreciation reports. We have a number of stratas that contract us to actually give them technical advice. So when there's a problem with the roof, we look at the roof, we tell them, no, it's needing seals at whatever, the skylights, it's not a roof failure. No, you don't have to replace the windows, you can actually get parts, this is where you can get the parts, this is who can fit them for you. We do all that sort of stuff. That's the end of my presentation, I think. Hold on a second. Yeah, it is. Any questions on any of this?
I'll just bring up the point. One of the discussions that Russ and I have had many, many times as I've attended his inspections on strata properties is that the engineers or the technicians that are writing these reports have a tendency to have every component of a building failing on the same year. And part of what Russ, I think, was trying to emphasize is that life expectancy of any component in a building can be extended through proper maintenance, but there's no reconciliation in these depreciation reports for that factor. So,
Yeah. So historically, stats have been created out of buildings historically, but bear in mind, nobody was looking after them properly. So the stats are kind of distorted that way. So for example, you'll find in a number of reports, vinyl windows, are projected, and I've seen replaced at 25 years, I've seen 30 years, I've seen 35 years. Well, because we're all researching guys, we're applied science guys, I've researched. I could find no information on the island. There's a company up island that makes windows and they'll warranty them for life. So that really intrigued me because life. But then they explained that if you sold the house, then it was only 10 years. But I eventually got a hold of the British Plastics Foundation, or Association, sorry, and they have done extensive research. And the original vinyl windows were invented in the 1960s. They were not terribly good. They failed under high ultraviolet conditions. And then around about 45 years ago, they actually got some chemicals in there that resisted the ultraviolet. So the information they provided was that they now know that vinyl windows, and it's a similar climate from there to here, are going to last a minimum of 45 years. Because they know that those first batch are still good 45 years later. They don't know if they're going to hit 50, 55, 60, where they're going to be requiring to change. So when we're doing projections, we're looking at vinyl windows at 45 years. What we do know is that components are going to fail. Mechanisms will break. Window seals are going to go. So that's how the projection should go. In financial planning, and I find almost without fail, and I would say 99% of the depreciation reports I've looked at, some are really technically competent, but financially they're dismal. Because those guys are technicians, they're engineers. They don't understand money until you give them a check. So that's the whole basis of understanding. When you project over 30 years, the first thing you've got to look at is which of these items are not flexible. When my roof needs to be replaced and it's worn out, like the tires in your car when they're worn out, you can go and buy that stuff you paint on to give you another 100,000, you'll be conned. It will not. When they need to be changed, they are inflexible. Those are the ones you plot into your financial plan first. Then the other stuff gets built around it. So that repairs and maintenance can push, like windows, for example, metal frame windows. Anybody living in a 70s or 60s building with metal frame single pane windows?
Yeah, my daughter.
Okay, metal frame single pane windows. Those frames have an expected life of 70 to 80 years. The glass, forever. I still see glass that's 112 years old in use in Victoria. Are they efficient? No. Are they attractive? No. But the reality is, they can still keep going. So if you need to replace a roof, or you need to replace other inflexibles, why would you be replacing your windows? So you can caulk them, you can seal them, you can replace the glass, you can keep them going. That's what I call a flexible asset. So you want to take your projections and put them into your inflexibles and your flexibles and make sure that your cash flows are going to work to the best benefit of everybody in the strata. Because that's the Strata Corporation's responsibility, to look after the strata as a whole. All right, any questions there? Oh, yes.
What about elevators? What's the life of an elevator? Is it 40 years or?
Well,
It's well looked after every month.
You asked a very interesting question, because that's the one item, when you go through the list of what must be in the report, is not included. Anybody know that?
What?
It's not included.
Why?
Well, why?
Yeah.
I think, I don't know for sure, because I've tried phoning the Premier a couple of times, but I've never picked up. I'm not sure, but I suspect because it falls under Factories and Machinery Act, which requires that they be inspected continually. Yeah. But it's not there for projections. I write a comment in that you want to put it in because it's a major capital asset, so it really should be there. And fortunately, most people doing this do put it there. But you'll find, and I do it as well, I'm not the guy who analyzes all that. Because it falls under Factories and Machinery, I actually get, and you're contractually bound in most stratas, I will first go to the guy who's contracted. I'll get permission from the Strata to talk to him, and what I always do is ask for a projection over 30 years of what they need to do. And when I get that projection, I then compare it to what the code requires, and then I call them back and I say, well, item 3, 8, 9, and 12 are not required by code. And he says, no, but it'd be way better if they had them. I say, yeah, but for projections, I'm not putting those in, unless the Strata wants. You can spend as much money as you want if you got it, but you want to look after your money. I also don't have any objection to special levies, because, myself included, nobody is so darn good at projecting that they will be so accurate that everything is going to be absolutely perfect, and you will contribute exactly the right amount, and you'll have it at exactly the right time. So putting some special levies in gives me a little benefit that I can maybe overshoot a little bit to make sure that you're not let down when that roof needs to be replaced, and I told you $50,000 and your estimate comes in at $49,000. I'm a genius. But if I tell you 50 and it comes in at 130, I'm an idiot and you really don't like me. So I make sure that I always overshoot a little bit, and so does everybody else doing this, and some will overshoot a lot. So if you project in some special levies, and they don't happen, you're also a hero. I always tell people, if there's special levies projected in here, and when I analyze that report, I take it down per unit per month over an entire 30 years. So if they're putting away $50, I can look at it and tell you, well, they should be putting away $325 over the entire 30 years, flat rating it. So you can either start at the 50 and escalate all the time if the Strata isn't, and put some money in your own savings. So that when these things happen, you're prepared. And if they don't happen, it's still your money. You put it all into the contingency fund, and it doesn't happen, and when you sell and leave, your neighbors are not going to have a farewell party and write you a check and say, here's your money back.
From a buyer's perspective, would I be hiring you to help me read a depreciation report?
Of course you, and I'm not biased. So how we do this, now Ryan goes through all the documents. We do it slightly differently. So between all the guys here and all of us, I write all the analysis. These guys will go out with the analysis. They'll look at the unit. They'll go through the electrical, the plumbing, the heating. They'll look for oddities. They'll go through the building. They'll look at the capital items, not every single item. They're looking at the big cost items. They'll then compare it to what the depreciation report says. And they'll make notes in there. They'll then take my analysis and break it down so that you'll know that this Strata is actually needing $265 per month per unit. They'll then explain the financials. They're putting away $90 per month per unit. And we'll normally suggest that you make some kind of savings. And we're not saying make up the difference. We're saying if you're not making up the difference, escalate your savings annually to make sure that you're keeping pace. And as they raise their amount of money, you can drop yours. If there are no special levies in the future, then just simply keep pace with what they're doing. All make sense? Other question?
So the difference between what you do and a home inspector?
Well, okay, so yeah, good question. We are all registered home inspectors as well, all licensed with the government. Most home inspectors are doing the unit. That's simply the box in the air on the third floor. But you're buying into more than that. So you need to know what's your liability going to be going forward. In your unit, that's fairly easy to quantify. The rest of the building, you need to go through the report. I've seen depreciation reports that are very competently done, but then they do a couple of little things. Like there's one where they said anything under 20,000, all the owners took a vote or indicated to us, producing this report, that anything under 20,000 they're going to allocate to the operating fund. So we're not to include it, and we're not going to do that. Regulations don't allow that. So straight away you're in trouble with your report. And later in the report, they said the parquet membrane needs to be replaced in 10 years, and that's going to be $2.7 million. But the Strata Council has asked us not to include this in the financials, and so we haven't. And in this particular case, it works out to almost $30,000 per unit as a special levy when it hits. Well, that distorts everything. In the 20,000, when I went through this report and worked it out, that was another $11,000 per unit. So It's a wonderful sign. I get excited about this stuff.
One of the things that we've found over time is that many of the good ideas in construction 30 years later we find out weren't such a good idea. And we've all heard the leaky condo syndrome and the problems that wrapping buildings in plastic created. The next sort of two big things that we're experiencing in buildings right now are the older buildings that were pre-1985 are balcony repairs, which doesn't seem like a big deal when you're standing on your 8 by 15-foot deck, but they can be $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 because of the way the building is built. The next big thing that's coming, and we're just starting to see the tip of the iceberg, and Russ just mentioned it, is the building, or the parquet membranes. Those are going to be hugely expensive.
Don't all run out and sell your condos tonight. That's what Jeff's trying to get you to do. So parquet membrane, everybody know what that is?
No.
So if you have an underground parquet, and the building that's the profile of the building, and the parquet extends out underground. That underground portion has a membrane, much like the roof membrane more than likely, that's going over the concrete. Concrete's porous, so you don't want water to get to it. So it's going across to protect, not the concrete really, but the rebar inside the concrete from corroding, so it's keeping the water out. Then you go into the parquet one day and you see this kind of white chalky powder. What's happened is the membrane's been breached and it's pushing the lime and the salts into the surface. Ultimately, that's going to start to drip. You can do repairs. They can do plug and patch products, epoxy injections. But eventually the day will come when it needs to be replaced. And that may mean taking up all of the landscaping, pulling out all the trees, getting rid of everything, getting to the membrane, replacing it completely. Buildings built in the 60s, early 70s, they used to use mop and tar applications, so they didn't use an actual membrane, they just mop tar on. And some of those, they've got tar that's maybe 1.25 inches, some of them I've seen at 4 inches, and the thicker ones are actually still going. So yeah, that is one of the big items that will eventually come up. I look at them all as buildings. My background's buildings. I look at them all as buildings, different buildings. Some require membranes in parquets, some don't. And it doesn't mean because you have a parquet membrane that you're at any detriment. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means you prepare for the cost that's coming. It's as simple as that. Every single one of us lives in a different home environment, and we all grew up differently. We're all people, and we all have the same needs. We want to be warm, we want to be dry, and that's the fundamental of what you want in the place you live. And you want to make sure that if you're not warm and dry, that there's the money to make it right. So they're all the same fundamental. There's just different components. And that's the stuff that we all deal with. Building envelope, just so you know, has always been a hot topic. It's the thing that keeps the envelope is the exterior siding, the roof. It's the stuff that keeps the water and the cold out, as well as the heat. But here's an interesting point, is you live in a 1970s building that's got a stucco exterior. You were never required to bring that up to current code. Building codes are locked in time. So your building is built to a 1972 building code. It's locked into 1972. You do not have to put in a rain screen at any point in time unless you take off more than 50%. That's when the code jumps in and says, and it's also a discretion of the building inspector how he interprets. But if you take it all off, you cannot just put back what you had. You have just stepped across the line into the new building code. So decks, for example, if you said, okay, we got a problem with decks. We got 40 decks, and 39 of them have got rot in them. We're going to prioritize now. Which ones are the most important? These 5. We're going to fix these 5 this year, those 5 next year, And over the next few years, 8 years, I think, if my math's right, that wasn't my report card, by the way, we'll have them all fixed. They will still look like they did in 1972, and we are absolutely compliant with every regulation, every code. However, if you want to strip them all off, now the new handrail requirements come in, the new membrane requirements, the fixings of the handrails, all of those codes just became relevant. So it's knowing the facts. If you live in a condo building, know the facts. So in any building, in townhouses in particular, roofs, exterior painting, sealing of the envelope, making sure you're not getting water in, that's normally a pretty big cost. We've actually got stats in the office that we're starting to produce where we can see that a 20-unit townhouse complex should be putting away in that band of money per month. So we're actually, with Rick standing at the back there, who's just observing tonight, we're actually putting together a rating system for strata buildings that will actually indicate how you are in that band. Are you at the top, are you at the bottom, are you in the middle, are you below the minimum? So that's coming in the future. But roof, number one. If your strata is built in the 70s and you've got aluminum wire, not that that's a big common issue, but it could raise its head. So it's just being aware of those things. That answer your question?
I think.
Yeah, paving. Paving is a big one for stratas. And their maintenance and repairs, crack seal. Crack seal, by the way, almost 100% of the people doing crack sealing do not do it correctly. They just simply paint over the crack. To do it correctly, you need to blow out the crack, get the tar into the crack, and then seal the top of the crack. So legislation every 3 years, and as Ryan said, you can defer them. Deferral period is 18 months, and I suspect they created 18 months because they know the AGM's every year. If they said annual, and you put your AGM off for a week, you're in violation of the requirements. So they gave you that 18 months, so you're a little flexible. And there can be good justification for deferring. I've seen stratas that are deferred by a year or two because they're doing a lot of work, and they don't want to get the new report done until they're finished, so there's a good reflection of where they were and where they are now. But if you're deferring because you've done absolutely nothing, and you don't, and I have a strata that I've worked with that has done that, and here we are 5 years later, and they got less money in the fund and more problems coming. That's not a good idea to defer. Well, I want to thank you guys very much for coming out and not for giving me a hard time. My wife has prepared me for this evening for years. I've been able to resist that, so thank you very much.